that it will bring you destruction, nothing less. So all narrative is the sense of the ambiguous or equivocal sense of the problematics and the effort to deal with it. Now, if that's the case, it seems to operate at right angles to the thing that I call a story. And sometimes you find in a kind of work by most everybody, most stories have narratives in them, or possible narratives in them. And most narratives are found usually wrapped around by story, but they're not always. It's not always. You can have narratives that operate differently as long as they have this. And that's when certain collages actually, or collage-like structures seem to be proto-narrative. For example, when the Franciscan priest Bernardino da Sahagún decided literally to map the great culture of the Aztecs, he had Aztec informants and asked them questions. One of his tasks was to ask questions about individual words and interrogate the native speaker about what their experience was of those words. And so you would get things like a mushroom, something called a mushroom. You got the definition of a mushroom. In definition of mushroom read in Aztec, it is round like a severed head. It sounds very Aztec, yes. Or they did a gorge. It is narrow, or it is narrow. It is narrow. It is dark. It is open. It is open. It is sunny. It is deep. It is shallow. It is horrible. It is sharp. And you get this changing, sequential changes in attitude that seems to project an imaginary narrative in which this person is trying to reenact going through a gorge. In fact, I suspect that what his Aztec informers who had no idea what a definition was, you imagine a Franciscan telling his Aztec translator, tell them I'd like to have their definition of a gorge. What would an Aztec have to do with a definition? They wouldn't have they had no word for a definition. So the native speaker, who is the translator, must have said to them, what's your experience of a gorge? And they gave their experience of the gorge. And the experience came in narrative order. It came, but it didn't come in a story because they thought they just were being told to give their experience. An experience is not story-like necessarily, although it may be. Now, what does this have to do with the question of material? The question is there something more material in the sequences of experience that are given by the Aztecs than an abstract account? If you say this is what this means. Now, I've always thought that, I haven't always thought it, but in very recent years I've thought that what you get out of an experience is more than what you can abstract from it. That an experience has always got something extra, that it has more granularity and more parts, more detail than an abstract account. And I rationalized it this way. Think of it this way. At one point back in the 50s, I was working for the Forestry Department of the United States, and I was there working in northern Idaho, there was the great forest, and we were trying literally to clear the area of a certain kind of disease that vine maple had. These flakes on the vine maple brought bacteria of some kind or other into contact and were poisoning the pine trees. And our job was to literally get rid of as much of this vine maple as we could possibly do. And some of us were better at dealing with the negotiation of the hills. I was one of them. So I was one of the ones mapping the terrain that had to be freed of vine maple. And what I would do is I would have these cords that I would try to find an area of concentrated vine maple and then take little stakes and pin them in and then take cords and wrap them around the configuration in which I found the vine maple. And it was kind of pleasantly lonely work. You were literally drunk on the smell of evergreens, and it was very charming in some respect. It was a virgin forest, and it was a great pleasure. And it was such a great pleasure because even chipmunks were not afraid of you. I mean, if you saw a chipmunk there, because they'd never seen people, if you saw a chipmunk there, you could bend down and look at the chipmunk and look closely, and the chipmunk wouldn't run away if you didn't make a quick move. So it was a very startling area to begin with. And in the midst of this, I'm dragging my little cord along behind me, and it snags on something. I'm in this sort of deliriously pleasant state, and I'm tugging on the cord, and it doesn't go. And I turn around and I think, what is this? And I start to go back, and then I stop, because I see about as far from me as you are over there, standing there, I see a grizzly bear. And the grizzly bear, for the moment, is hunched. A grizzly bear is not like a little black bear. Our camp used to be where we had this camp where the little black bears used to come out and raid the garbage, and we used to drive them away by throwing tennis balls at them, which didn't hurt them, but it panicked them. But the grizzly was not like that. Grizzly was not a little black bear. And what I did is first I froze, and I wanted to see what would happen, because I realized if the grizzly was going to attack me, it would be very difficult to get away anyway, so why don't I just, freeze? And the grizzly sort of stood up, and I would swear it was 10 feet tall. And there I looked at the grizzly, and the grizzly looked, but they have very bad eyesight. I also knew that they don't see very well. I knew a lot about these things in those days, more than I know now. And the grizzly bear looked and sniffed the air, and I felt a great sigh of relief, because the air was not blowing from me to him, to her. It was flowing from her to me. So she didn't smell me. And it was summer, when they're well fed and they're not terribly hungry, because there's every kind of fruit and fish available in the virgin forest. And they were not suffering from hunger, and she had not just dropped her cubs. They wouldn't have been in this dangerous position by mid-July. So I thought the best thing I can do is just stand still for a while. And I stood still for a while, and then the grizzly moved off. And all the time the grizzly had been standing on my cord. And I had the cord free again. Now, when I tell the story this way, it's sort of very curious. I was convinced that the grizzly bear had been standing on the cord that I was pulling. Is that really true? I don't know. I remember that because I made a meaningful connection of the grizzly bear's appearance and the snagged cord. It could have been sheer coincidence. The cord could have snagged on a root of something, and the grizzly bear could just have happened to be standing up around that time because it felt like it. And yet somehow the way I told the story is the way I remembered it. And the way I remember it, I can't go back and recover anything that disagrees with it. Once the story is told that way, that's it. So from then on, this story takes on a life of its own. I haven't told. I don't think I may have told Ellie the story. I don't think I would. I put it in a piece, but I did tell it to you, so it already had taken shape.
You told it to me recently.
There you go. I was thinking of it for some reason. So once it takes shape, it's been shaped, and this is one of the problems of narrative as opposed to the problem of collage, that a narrative sometimes takes too much shape. Sometimes you have to be very wary of narratives. Like I actually had lived a life very often filled with contingency and images that were contingent. And I had a very charming family, with the sole exception of my mother, who was a total family drag. All the others were lively and bohemian, and my mother was tried to be an American of an ordinary sort, and she wasn't an American, although she didn't have, and she could, or she was an American of an unordinary sort. But the rest of the family were lively anyway, and living with my aunts and my uncles, there was an uncle who became an immediately image of pleasure for me, in that his life was so wonderfully unhappy and peculiar. I was very young when I was living with him. I was about 5, or maybe no, I couldn't have been that old. I must have been nearly not 3 yet. We were sitting on the porch in Brooklyn, and we were crossing the street. There were these team of guys in baseball uniforms, and they were wearing gray uniforms with red socks. And I was sitting with my Uncle Lou on the back porch, and I said to him, "What team are they?" And he said, "The Red Sox." And I started to laugh, because I knew they weren't the Red Sox. They weren't the Boston Red Sox. And he was making a joke. So I was a 2.5-year-old kid who realized that Lou was a very funny guy. And then he would come home under odd circumstances and stay with my grandmother, who lived with three of her daughters. And he would always show up in weird circumstances. Once he showed up with this rather beautiful coffee-colored woman who had a great feather boa, and he told her she was an Indian princess. And I thought that was kind of wonderful too, because I thought somehow princesses were more beautiful if they were Indian princesses, as opposed to little German princesses. I had a taste for the exotic. What could you do? But I enjoyed my uncle. And then on June 16th or June 18th, 1934, a family got a phone call that Lou had fallen off a cliff in Yosemite and was dead. Now this was part of my family mythology, and I imagined him climbing a cliff in Yosemite, reaching upward, reaching for a handhold, grabbing a rock, the rock unfortunately dislodging, him slipping and falling 100 feet to his death at the bottom in the Merced River. And that's the way I saw the story. And then I had another uncle. Seems like I'm doing a blitz on draw with the 7 uncles. I had another uncle who at the age of 12 was a brilliant chess player. A very brilliant chess player. He looked like a fullback for a major team, even at the age of 13 or 12. But he was literally the best chess player in Scranton. And Emanuel Lasker, Scranton had its distinctions. Emanuel Lasker was coming to town to play simultaneous chess against 20 people. Well, he would be blindfolded, and he'd play 20 different people at the same time. This was a standard performance for, get paid a fair amount of money for doing this. And because Sam was such a great kid player, they bought him a ticket to the thing, and he took one of the chess boards, and he was one of the 20 people playing Lasker. And the game developed in the usual manner in which Lasker killed the weaker players very rapidly, disposed of them, and he was coming down the home stretch. And there were still about 3 people left, in which the 12-year-old was it. And Sam had a winning game. My uncle had a one game. Of course, he would have to close it. In other words, of course, he would have to close it. He might be intimidated by Lasker's fame into blundering when he should be literally squeezing Lasker into the mate. And he debated. Lasker offered him a draw, which was a lot of distinction. And Sam kept thinking, should I take the draw? He took the draw. And ever afterward, I always thought that what was wrong was he should never have taken the draw. So these were my 2 images of my uncles. The one who was trying to do something he maybe couldn't do, or the one who literally should never have taken a draw and took the draw. And I talked about this in a piece I did some time ago, in which I used the images of the two. So what is a poet supposed to be? Which one is it? The answer was never play for the draw.